No, we're about to start. We're recording the video already. All right, okay. What's good, everybody, and welcome back to an extra special edition of Hyperfocus. Today we are joined by David.
Hello.
David and I have known each other for quite some time. We've worked on many projects together. David and I were actually talking not so long ago based on an article that he'd just written for Medium, which I found super interesting, and it is the premise to many a conversation that we've had in the past. And I thought it would be really, really exciting and super interesting to share this with you guys. The name of the article is Systematic Design versus Design Systems. So luckily, David is in Hamburg at the moment, and I managed to grab some of his time and get him into the studio to have a little bit of a deeper dive into that topic. So without further ado, let's jump straight in. I will introduce you to David. Would you like to let everybody out there know who you are and where you come from?
Sure, I can do that. As Paul just said, I'm David. I'm a freelance UI and UX designer, mostly specializing in systematic design and information architecture. Also dabbling in design operations, which is basically about streamlining the various processes and tools within the various design teams I'm working with, and with a special eye on the front-end development, because that's oftentimes the Achilles heel in the project, because the communication is not quite there yet. So yeah, that's in part also what I really enjoy doing.
Okay, nice. So actually, one thing that I would really like to ask you, and hopefully we can answer that age-old question, or it could be just seen as being a new age-old question, because I have experienced this time and time again on projects, the difference between a pattern library and a design system. And I'd like to actually start off by asking you, can you explain to us what the difference is?
Sure. I mean, I can try and answer that. First and foremost, it's safe to say that every designer has their own definition of what a design system or a pattern library actually is, which, as you know, as a freelancer, is one of the first things we actually have to get to know, how the team actually calls it and what that actually is. So I can only talk for myself. So on my point of view, what a pattern library is initially is actually just a set of the very basic framework, the very foundation of what you're going to be using in your interface design.
It's the variables, right? It's you kind of your building blocks, the foundations that you're going to start with.
Exactly. So building blocks is, that's the best way to put it. So what that is for me, it's usually just building up the various font styles, the typography, getting to really get down to the colors, define the colors, name the colors, talk with the front end about how to name the colors. We're going to get to that later. That's really, really important.
Consistency there, yeah.
And also talk about scaling. What are the margins? What are the paddings? And how can we use them globally in all our designs, all our components? And actually that's also, of course, part of the pattern library is the various components you're going to be using, meaning buttons, cards, icons, or whatever you want to call it. That all goes into the pattern library. The difference for me to a design system, and correct me if you have a different opinion on that,
Please.
Yeah, you can definitely do that, is that a pattern library usually lives in one place. So that can be the Figma library of the designer, or it can be actually the front-end library of the developer, so be it Storybook or whatever. And what's usually missing there is the connection from front-end to design, and actually also copywriting and so forth. And
often referred to as a central point of truth.
Yes, I was missing that.
There we go. It's a favorite word. You've heard that many times on this channel. But yeah, like a design system most definitely is a space where all that documentation is, all the stuff that you actually need to use to actually be able to understand the pattern library and to be able to hand over to developers, other designers, to share a bigger global kind of idea about what things are is really, I would say, where a design system, you know, starts and grows from.
Exactly. I mean, probably, at least from a design perspective, the very start of that design system is the pattern library as the central point of truth. But a design system actually connects the various product teams in a way that a pattern library simply can't. Because a design system is accessible to everyone throughout the team. It doesn't matter if you're a developer, if you're a copywriter, or if you're a designer. Like, everyone is going to access the same thing. I guess you can almost call it like a digital corporate identity almost, because it dives more into the why instead of just the how. So why are you designing the products the way you are designing it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a little bit more detailed. We're definitely taking a deep dive today. So yeah, we have a nice introduction to how design systems over pattern libraries really work. But there's some really interesting stuff that I really wanted to kind of jump into a little bit more from the article that you wrote. And you talk about systematic design. And yeah, I'd really like to kind of understand what you mean by that.
Sure. I mean, at its core, a pattern library adheres to the principles of systematic design for me. It's not in the early days where the designer was more of an artist and just there to make stuff pretty, as you probably heard a lot if you are a designer out there. What you actually do with a systematic design approach is to actually build stuff so it's going to be lasting and it's going to be scalable as well. And you're not just going to be building stuff because it's pretty, but you're also going to be thinking about how you actually build it in a way that it's going to be usable in hopefully years on end, and on the various platforms we have to produce the various products.
You also mentioned that you shouldn't start too early with a systematic design, right?
Yeah.
Again, why? Why shouldn't you start too early? Because I'm sure, like, there's this general notion or this eager excitement as a creative on a new project to jump in and get going and you know, turn the gas up to 120 and just go. But you're saying, don't do this somehow. Don't start too early.
I mean, I would say turning the gas up is the exact right way to go, especially when a project starts. And what I'm saying is that starting the pattern library too early could actually end up in more work for you, and it actually can inhibit your creativity in a way that, I mean, I fall down that rabbit hole quite a lot as well, because I tend to start way too early. I tend to basically create all these buttons and define font styles and so forth. But in the end, I usually end up a couple of weeks later to actually clean all that up, because during the iteration phases where you actually experiment and try out designs, you talk to clients, you talk to your colleagues, and you kind of do all these tests and realize all these neat font styles you kind of set up earlier just don't work.
I think one thing also to kind of take away, or a perspective on doing things, is good is better than perfect. So don't end up getting stuck in details right from the beginning. Don't overthink things, don't over-engineer things. It's an iterative process. Building design systems, building systematic design, and it will change. I mean, that's one of the great things about what we are doing with this kind of work. So don't get too emotionally attached to the stuff that you're doing. Just think of it as a living, breathing organism that will grow and grow with it. I think that's super important to remember.
Emotions as designers.
Well, you know, we are temperamental beasts as designers. There's one interesting thing as well that you also mentioned in your article, which is about budget.
Go back real quickly on the question of why not to start early. Actually, one major thing that we actually ran into, it's a major problem through the years, is that a design system or like a pattern library, to build it up takes time. And in the beginning, you actually want to show something to the client fast. So you get the ball rolling, you have something to discuss. If you're not doing that, basically, if you're starting to build up that design pattern library too early, you don't really have a lot to show, which can be a problem if the client really wants to see stuff.
Well, that leads on very nicely to the question. Budget, because we're talking clients. You're saying design to budget. I think we're talking about our emotional connection to wanting to be perfectionists, wanting to do great stuff and kind of blowing everything out of proportion. And actually the realization of the project is like this big in comparison to this big is what you imagine it to be. Is this something that you mean when you're talking about designing to budget, kind of keep it on the down low, keep it within reason?
I mean, definitely, that's one part, is basically you have to think about the need of that pattern library you're building. Like, is it actually time for a pattern library at this point of the project, or would it just take time away from other more important stuff? And also, does it actually help the team and the client build it, or is it just something over-engineering and basically just caters to your own ego? I mean, I'm a designer, so I fall victim to that still as well. I'm trying not to, but another thing as well is if you're actually building a full-fledged design system, it's going to be a project of its own, so it's going to be extremely expensive and time-consuming. So you definitely have to keep that in mind while talking to the client about it as well.
Okay, you also mentioned in the article about not overcomplicating things.
Yes.
We've overcomplicated things on projects in the past. But what have you learned? I mean, how has your direction kind of swayed to make that a reality?
Yeah, I mean, we can actually jump into Figma real quick. Like, I put some stuff together to actually show you. I actually put it together on the train, so please don't judge too harshly.
Judge him. He needs to be judged.
Yes, by overcomplicating things. I mean, with every new update of Figma, there's new exciting stuff to actually work with. Like now there's variants and all that, and I definitely do that as well. Like I try to use everything I can, and I try to basically put everything I can into one component. But usually what you want to have is a pattern library that's also usable for people that actually are not there while you're building it. For example, you have to make sure that designers that are going to be onboarded in a year can still find their way through your pattern library and actually use it. So what I mean is, you also have to think about the UX of your files and not just the products you're creating. So for this example here, as you can see, this is an example of a primary button, a secondary button, tertiary button, and a text button. So what you could do is, of course, you could put all this together into one component, because, I mean, you have the tools to actually do it. But I would argue the easier you do it, the better it is for the next designer to actually access the file. So what I mean is, here in the example, you can see here, this is the instance of the masters I just showed you. On the right, you can see the fairly new feature, which is variants in Figma. You can basically quickly toggle, okay, is there an icon? You can toggle the size, and you can also toggle the different states of the button. Like, is it pressed? Is it the initial state? Or is it big? What doesn't make sense here is to actually put in, at least in my opinion, is to put in the secondary button as well, because in the assets, you wouldn't see it. So a new designer would actually go into the file and actually have to build a secondary button by themselves without actually knowing what that looks like.
All right, cool. Yeah, great. And a great new feature, by the way, from Figma.
Yeah, it's awesome.
A big topic that we have often spoken about, and it's something that I would love to do an entire episode on, and we probably will. It's something that's dear to my heart, and I know it's been very close to your heart as well within a lot of the projects that we worked on, and we continue to push this forward as a fundamental part of what we do, and that is accessibility, and how important today for designers who are watching this and maybe starting on their design systems, and maybe also from yourself personally, how important is accessibility in your work?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that over and over again in various projects. I mean, for us, it's one of the most important things to think about is, if you're building a digital product, chances are there's going to be thousands or maybe even millions of people using that product. So you want to make sure that every person can actually use the product properly. Be it my grandmother, like you have to make sure that the buttons are big enough that even my grandmother or my father, you call it the
fat man finger syndrome.
The fat man finger syndrome, right? So yeah, we could call it my father. So you got to make sure that even he can find and press the button, and you also have to think about the various disabilities of people, even if it's just visual. Like my stepfather, my stepbrother, for example, they have a red green disadvantage, so they can't tell the difference. So you have to make sure that the apps or the websites you design cater to these needs in some ways, so these people can still tell the difference.
I think, you know, also it's just one of the things that we really try to do is to bring in together the idea of building brands or solid foundations, which actually brands live inside of pattern libraries somewhat, because they're a translation of the decisions that you make earlier on in the phase of actually developing where you're going to go with your product or with your brand. And yeah, recognizing from the beginning your users, the people behind the products that you're using, or just in fact how they interact with the brand or the product themselves, that you're actually realizing, recognizing and representing them the best you can in the decisions that you make.
It's kind of a knockout argument. I mean, if you're a designer, you know that design can be highly emotional. So it's very, is it objective or subjective? It's very objective. Like everyone has their own opinion of what makes good design. But if you're going from the accessibility perspective, you can basically have a look at what the contrast is and actually to the WCAG, whatever. No, if you take accessibility as an argument, you take out the emotion in design, because it's basically a knockout argument. If it's an app for elderly people and the buttons are too small, you simply can't argue about the fact that the button should be smaller.
All right, thank you very much on regards to accessibility. Totally agree with you on that one for sure. If you have any examples, comments, questions of problems that you've run into, drop some comments in the comment section below, and we will try to answer them the best that we can. Or let's just get a conversation going, because I think it's a really important topic. As I said, we will probably make a video based all around that, so we can go into a deep dive, but there's nothing wrong with getting the conversation started right now, right here on this video. Okay, so the next question, we also touched on it a little bit at the beginning, is the importance of working with, yes, you know it, the developers. And we've definitely had our experience with developers, but there is a way to have a very, very good relationship. You just need to set that up from the beginning. And can you help us to understand how we can do that?
Sure. I mean, especially when it comes to a design system, you literally need the help of the developers you're working with. Otherwise, you're going to be building something that's not viable in the end, that basically can't be done. So what you want to be is basically you want to keep the developers in the loop, best case scenario from the very, very first wireframe on. So they know what's going on. You can keep the conversation going, and you can basically talk about how to name stuff, how to actually build it in a way that the developers can use it.
Naming conventions,
very right. And the nice thing, what I find about that is, first and foremost, I like talking to the development, maybe because I also have a slight coding background, so I actually know the very basics the guys and girls are talking about. So I like talking to them because I can feel that the communication is going better and better along the way. Like usually, you know, a lot of designers also and developers have these age-old image in their head that this is design, this is development, and there's no connection. But as you well know, I mean, nowadays the connection is fluid. There is no real boundary between what design and development is anymore. And the more you talk to each other, the better the communication. And I mean, you've emphasized on that in the last couple of projects we worked with in as well. it's building a culture where actually people talk to each other and want to work with each other to build something better.
Look, get in the same room, you know, take it as your objective, your mission. Get everybody together, have a chat. You know, it doesn't need to be orchestrated. It can be. You can create workshops around actually making great decisions based on all of the people in the room and all the different disciplines. But first and foremost, have a lean coffee, have a virtual coffee. I don't know, just come together and talk about your expectations and how best to do things. Because the great designs that you're going to come up with maybe are not even possible, or they could be even better if you had have talked to the developers in the first place. So I think out of that, just, you know, make sure that having that conversation, take it on your shoulders to mature and develop that culture. All right. Another thing you mentioned in the article on Medium, if I've not mentioned that already, is the importance of documentation. Can you tell us why?
Yeah, I mean, if you're building a pattern library or design system, I mean, documentation is key to actually have it scalable and actually have it being used in the years to come, because every time you make a change, you have to have some way to actually document that change, so everyone in the team and even throughout the whole product team itself knows what is changing. Also buys into what we just talked about earlier, is talk to the development, because they inherently worked in an agile environment and collaboratively. So we are actually now using, in Figma, for example, we're using a lot of principles of Git that is using. So
to be honest, in a way, I think we're kind of playing catch up. You know, I mean, this whole world may seem quite new and fast paced, but actually, the developers have been doing this a lot longer than we have. Even when it comes to systematic designs, all the way back to the beginning of interfaces from the Xerox machine, which we all know as a reference, developers were developing in that way. You know, they were building somewhat systematic, and we're kind of playing catch up. So we're not the pioneers in this. So there's a lot that we can actually learn.
yeah, definitely, and it buys into document your changes. So if you change the color of your button, make sure the whole team knows that something just changed, and maybe even talk to the team before you change it. Otherwise, you might end up breaking some files that are connected to this library.
Awesome. So I think that just about wraps it up. Do you have any final words, any lasting words that that we can take away from this pretty cool, pretty in-depth, detailed chat about design systems and systematic design? Anything that the guys can take away with them for their own personal use?
I mean, I can try. I mean, to recap, what's important is really not to really dive into, okay, I'm going to do a design system right away, but actually think about the principles, the underlying principles before you start designing. So think about systematic design in favor of a design system first. So basically build your foundation, slowly iterate that foundation like we talked about earlier. Don't start too early. Talk with the team, try to do your part in actually building a culture where where the whole team talks about everything, gets together and actually feels heard as well, which is, I guess, one of the major problems when it comes to the connection between development and design, that people are feeling left out sometimes. So just like Paul said earlier, keep the ball rolling and try to talk to people as much as you can, even if it's just a coffee. It makes the whole system better in the end, because, I mean, it's only the sum of its part, and that part is the team as well.
Thank you very much. I think that's the perfect place to end it. Thank you very, very, very much for your wise words. Thank you for joining us on the channel this week. It has been an absolute pleasure. So thank you, David. And don't forget, if you're enjoying this content, please give us a like and don't forget to subscribe. And we will see you in the next one.